Macedonia, Black Hawks and the much-feared Apaches, which have flown in from Albania. It looks like an invasion force, but the generals in charge are praying their men will not have to fire a shot. So far, NATO's air campaign in the Balkans has been casualty-free. Ironically, keeping the peace in Kosovo may be far more dangerous than making war. Ben Brown, BBC News, Bloodsay on the Kosovo-Macedonia border.
Draft resolution, after which the international peacekeeping force KFOR can roll into Kosovo. The military technical agreement between Yugoslavia and the G8 foresees a three-stage pull-out. An international peace presence is readying itself for the moment it can enter. Hopes for peace in the region were never higher.
Members are on their way in increasing numbers towards their peacekeeping mission in Kosovo. Early on Thursday, 2,000 Marines landed in northern Greece. From there, they head for the Kosovo-Macedonian border to take part in Operation Joint Guardian. The troops got their marching orders from the Pentagon. They're the advance guard of a 50,000-strong force to enter the shattered and possibly booby-trapped province. British troops will make up the largest. They're willing to help support the KFOR presence. The soldiers will have a difficult and hazardous mission. Their job, secure peace, if necessary, with their weapons. They have to restore some kind of infrastructure in Kosovo and allow for the safe return of hundreds of thousands of refugees. There will be allocated a region of its own. Western diplomats fear that refugees would be unwilling to return to areas with a Russian military presence.
These German troops are making a final survey of their personal equipment. They're making sure they have the essentials. Weapons are being checked, even though it's hoped they won't be needed. The countdown is on. This mission in Kosovo will be a risky encounter with the unknown.
I'll wait and see what happens there. We hope that we all get back okay. It's the Bundeswehr's first mission of this kind, so you just have to wait and see.
Since Wednesday night, their mission to secure peace in Kosovo by military means has become reality. Belgrade's signing of the military agreement was their marching order.
We got the order, and then we had to act very swiftly. We were ready to march within 1 hour, then we had to start. Then it was all postponed another day.
Weapons are being readied and vehicles marked with flags. Around 2,500 German soldiers will enter Kosovo in the first phase of Operation Joint Guard. These are mostly engineer troops, whose job it is to clear mines and check whether bridges and roads are passable. They're taking almost all of the heavy equipment they have: main battle tanks, armored vehicles, and munition.
To my knowledge, we have made very thorough preparations. I have no reason to have any negative doubts. In fact, to the contrary, the mood is more of breaking out for an adventure.
This contingent of German troops has had more than 2 months in Macedonia to prepare for the mission. This is likely to be the last night they spend sleeping in the barracks in Tetovo, Macedonia. Tomorrow, they'll be in Kosovo.
A tank transporter grinds its way along the road NATO forces will use when they come in from Macedonia. Armor that has been used with such deadly force over the months headed for the border with Serbia proper along routes prearranged with NATO. Among the first troops to go were special police units, which have been accused of the worst atrocities. The convoys of buses, trucks, and armor began later than NATO had expected. The Serb forces leave behind them widespread destruction. This is typical of what has been done to thousands of ethnic Albanian houses. The Serbs have a little over based along the border with Albania. The draftees among them say they're happy to be going home.
It's good. It's good or not good? Good. Good. Why do you think it's good?
Peace.
There is a deep-rooted fear, however, that the Kosovo Liberation Army will move into any security vacuum here. Within sight of a border post bombed into rubble by NATO, the mountainside burns from what the Serbs said were mortar exchanges with the KLA today. Some Serb officers are convinced that a secret deal has been made to allow the KLA to come in here on the coattails of NATO. There's a lot of dirty business in this agreement, one said. 6 months from now, things will be worse than ever. The armor will still be pulling out as NATO comes in. And even as the pullout got into gear, the destruction of Kosovo continued. As evening fell, a house burned on the edge of the capital, Pristina. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Kosovo.
The first NATO peacekeepers are expected to move into Kosovo as early as tomorrow. And it's
waiting, the Marines landed, the first of 1,700 troops coming ashore in Greece, the vanguard of American Task Force Falcon that's converging a few miles from the Kosovo border. This is suddenly a machine in motion. Soldiers from the Army's 82nd Airborne flying from Albania to a hot and dusty camp in Macedonia. But they won't be staying here long.
The Americans expect to be here only 5 days or less. And now, for the first time since they were sent to the Balkans, each of them knows their next stop will be Kosovo.
The danger, really, we don't know how to measure the danger either. I think the biggest danger is going to be the confusion.
Their mission when they move out will be to set up U.S. headquarters in Kosovo for the 7,000 Americans among NATO's 50,000 peacekeepers. But the plan's been for the British to go first, moving today to forward positions for a crossing into Kosovo. They were warned today they'll find human misery on the other side, horrors hard to face. The uncertainty of the job ahead is sinking in, and so is the magnitude.
They're going to be glad that they did, and they'll be able to tell their kids and their grandkids that they did something just and right, not just for America, but for the whole world.
We're fooling ourselves, said a GI here, if we think this won't change our lives. Richard Roth, CBS News, Petrovic, Macedonia.
Showing Yugoslav troops leaving. Unmanned drones flying over Kosovo beamed the pictures back live to NATO commanders. Dozens of Yugoslav army trucks and vehicles are now making their way out of Kosovo. Belgrade has an estimated force of about 40,000 inside the province. It has until June the 20th to withdraw them all.
The reasons for it are not being given officially, though there are British press reports suggesting that the British are ready, but other countries are not, including the United States. Now, what is happening today, though, before the actual forces go in, there are advanced teams, NATO tells us this morning, that are going in, including engineers driving in to check the roads and other logistics, which allowed the NATO to suspend their airstrikes. Overnight, NATO planes have been flying over Kosovo to confirm, to ensure, to watch, and make sure that the Yugoslav forces are pulling out. NATO flew U-2s, American U-2s, German Tornadoes, and French Mirages, taking pictures and video to watch and make sure that these forces are moving out. Altogether, about 150 trucks, armored personnel carriers, and buses and cars had been seen moving out of Kosovo yesterday. That pullout continues today, and again, as I said, over the next 10 days, that is supposed to continue. The U.S. or the NATO deployment is supposed to be up toward Pristina, securing the Pristina airport, and then quickly moving into the northern region, which is where those Yugoslav forces are starting to pull out. About 6,000 forces, members of that force, are moving out of that northern sector where the British and French forces will be moving in. The map of that...
Vehicles here of every size and description, but before we get into all of that, let's call upon Major Eric Gunnis, who is spokesman for Task Force Falcon, which will be the slug here on the operation when all elements come together. Where are we now, Major?
Well, yesterday we closed about 80% of the force, which equates roughly to about 1,100 personnel, and a majority of our combat power is now on the ground here at Camp Able Sentry.
Now that includes the Marines?
No, the Marines, I believe, have closed about half of their personnel. I don't want to talk for them, right. But in the next few days, they will also close up to full strength.
What's going to be happening today? I understand it was a night of not much activity.
Well, as I said, we closed the majority of our combat power yesterday. Today, we will focus on bringing in the rest of our support equipment. You'll see a lot of Humvees being slung load into Camp Able Sentry, along with Connexes that has all the equipment, support equipment needed. You also see the rest of the personnel closing on Camp Able Sentry.
British Paras and Gurkhas are ready to cross the border. They'll form the spearhead of KFOR. As yet, they have no clear...
In the American media, I know of one section of the American media that was told if you reported that, it wouldn't be very loyal to American soldiers who are about to put their life on the line. So there is this major conflict going on at the moment. The only thing we know for sure is that it should start at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's not been finally decided yet who will actually be the first troops in.
Keith, you and I were talking a couple of days ago. Mike Jackson was concerned that the Americans were getting ready to blame...
They were in the red berets of the paratroops. There were others. It's being guarded by the Italians. It seems very much a European-style NATO operation. Now, they are ironing out the more unpleasant details of this advance into Kosovo and the Serb retreat from Kosovo. The brass tacks of moving that many men in safely, and the same for the Serbs moving out safely. Talking about minefields, talking about booby traps, talking about different areas where there are different emotional feelings running high, talking about the danger of KLA activity, talking about snipers. This is all the groundwork preparation that has come to this point now, but has been worked out for many months here on the ground by the troops, largely governed by British officers in Macedonia. Now,
we'd like to remind everybody that these are raw pictures, unedited. We just received them. These are the Russian troops. You're seeing them as we receive them from satellite. They're feeding into us right now from Yugoslavia. We're seeing the Russian flag. We see S4 also, S4 on one of the trucks, which is what these troops' former mission was. S4 is the stabilization force in Bosnia. This truck has the S taken out of it. We also saw some of the trucks having KFOR initials on them, which is what their new mission is expected to be. That is part of the Kosovo force. KFOR stands for Kosovo Force, although the terms under which these troops will participate in that force.
Confusion in Moscow, which earlier said Russian troops had not yet received marching orders. It is not yet clear whether these Russian units are going to wait at the Kosovo border or whether perhaps they have orders to quickly cross over and take up positions of their own in Kosovo. The Russians have consistently demanded a peacekeeping sector of their own in Kosovo, refusing to be incorporated into the NATO command structure there. By contrast, NATO has insisted on a unified command in Kosovo, so with Russian troops on the road south to Kosovo and confusion in Moscow, the situation remains fluid. Rolita?
Walter, was this coordinated with Belgrade? What do we know about that?
We can't say for sure that it was coordinated with Belgrade, but because of the close religious and fraternal ties between Serbs and Russians, and because of the fact that the government of Slobodan Milosevic, the Yugoslav president, has always been extremely sympathetic to the Russians and saw them as his fraternal brothers, we have to assume that this is at least approved by President Milosevic's government, because these are the troops whom he believes will best protect his interests when they go into Kosovo. Rolita?
Walter, what are they saying about what their immediate plans are?
Russian soldiers riding atop armored personnel carriers and light armored vehicles don't really talk to reporters, so we don't know. All we can report is that they are moving, despite the fact Moscow earlier claimed they don't have marching orders. We've seen them crossing the Sava River earlier this morning into downtown Belgrade, there to take the road south toward Kosovo. What happens when they get to border? The border there is the big question, Rolita, and we have no idea what their orders are.
And
they're clearing out of this area. We expect the NATO troops to be moving into this area very soon. Most likely the British and the French will be the first ones in, and we expect them to arrive at any time, and the NATO operation could be underway within 24 hours, Rolita.
Lou, was there an overland from Bosnia? That's according to NATO military sources. They're apparently going to get their feet on the ground first, just as this row emerges between Britain and America as to who's going to get there first. The vehicles, many of them marked with the KFOR sign, that's the abbreviation for the International Kosovo Peacekeeping Force, crossed at the Pavlović-Kuprija crossing near the Bosnian border. It said they would go through Belgrade and then head south to Kosovo, although their final destination wasn't known. When they get there, a Russian military commander has said that Russia wants to run its own sector in the north of Kosovo, in areas with a heavy population of ethnic Serbs, because he said they trust Russia and therefore it'll be easier for us to bring about mutual cooperation. There you are, the first pictures in of Russian troops heading toward Kosovo.
Pictures.
of Russian troops reportedly entering Belgrade. A column of Russian military vehicles, according to the Serbs, arrived at a toll barrier at Simenovici, 30 kilometers west of Belgrade. That's according to a Serb news agency. 5 jeeps and a command vehicle were the first to cross the barrier, and then 15 personnel carriers and a number of trucks followed behind. The vehicles are carrying Russian flags and KFOR insignia. Now that's according to, there's the KFOR insignia. That's according to the Belgrade news agency. You can see the troops, the column lined up outside Belgrade. We're told about 30 kilometers, I think, west of Belgrade, and they've stopped here at this toll barrier in Simenovici. Now, these have been denied by Moscow, and we're also getting reports, indeed, that these troops, or Russian troops, have entered Belgrade. We're also hearing that British forces have been placed on immediate notice to move into Kosovo after these reports that these Russian troops have been moving through Serbia to enter the province. We're aware of the reports about the Russian column, say the British, and we've placed our troops on immediate notice to move as from 12 noon. Now these troops could, I don't know if this is a town or whether this is indeed Belgrade that we're looking at. It could well be, but let me just repeat the reports we're getting from Belgrade and the news agency there, that this column of Russian military vehicles, KFOR, were not supposed to cross until tomorrow morning. These military vehicles, a convoy of Russian vehicles, arrived at a toll, stopped there to gather the convoy together, and then moved on towards...
Serbian forces continue their withdrawal northwards from Kosovo. These units are among the thousands of Yugoslav troops who must be out of the province within 11 days. NATO, though, is not yet basking in its success, as the US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright arrived in Macedonia to meet American troops and the force commander, Britain's General Jackson. His troops have still not moved into Kosovo. Troops could even be in Kosovo before NATO. These troops from a motorized brigade were busy training on Thursday at their Balashiha base. Several hundred airborne troops are also said to be on standby, with others on their way from Bosnia. NATO could yet find itself having to defuse a potential conflict with the Russians, even before it has successfully seen off the Serbs. Jim Fish, BBC News.
Again at dawn tomorrow. That's an awful long way away.
Yes, indeed. But remember that most of the troops that are on that short standby will be the paratroop regiments and the extra company of paratroopers accompanying them, also the Gurkhas. Now, those troops are accustomed to being on very short notice standby. It's not quite as arduous as it may seem, and certainly the larger numbers of the force, the full 30,000, won't be on that same kind of notice. But you're right, if they are given that sort of deadline to work to, a potential 2-hour standby or even a half-hour standby, then they have to be anticipating that something will happen soon. And I think that must have been decided. We've still got this meeting going on behind me between low-level Serb to the meetings with the Serb forces. I think in terms of the point that you were making before about ammunition, there's always details, there are always logistic last-minute hiccups to get such a large force on the ground. And General Jackson is not the kind of general or commander who would like to go into any kind of situation, hostile or otherwise, without knowing that everything he needed, but everything he needed, was in place. So if one item was missing, albeit some small element of supplies, I think he'd want them in place before he gave the word to go. Now that again has been compounded with certain speculation, perhaps that they're not ready yet and that they're not up to scratch with their equipment. We can't comment on that. If that were the case...
Way towards the Kosovo border. More RAF helicopters arrived today, but NATO commanders are still waiting for extra ammunition, equipment and troops they ideally require for the peacekeeping role they will now undertake in Kosovo. Britain hopes to have 13,000 troops and several more helicopters here ready to cross the border at the weekend. Ironically, the Serbs' delaying tactics have given NATO time it desperately needs to get its forces prepared. With the became clear that the RAF helicopters will play a crucial role in the first few hours and days. These are the helicopters that are likely to ferry the first British troops into Kosovo to secure a route for an armoured brigade nearly 100 miles long. The Chinooks will transport paratroopers, Gurkhas and their equipment to forward positions on high ground along the road to Pristina. Although they will be entering Kosovo by agreement with the Serbs, the pilots say the dangers of their mission are clear. Unexploded bombs, landmines and renegade Serb militias unwilling to surrender or withdraw. Many of the crew, who do not want to be named, have experience in Bosnia, including a female pilot who voices the concern they all share.
Not getting shot at, probably. That'd be my biggest concern, yeah, flying low and not getting shot at.
The threat is potentially a little bit higher given the mine risks, so there's possibly a little bit more tension.
The tension that comes from not knowing exactly what to expect. Flying into the unknown. Mark Austin, ITN, with British forces in Macedonia.
Way to the Kosovo front, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. They arrived in the daylight, but will travel under the cover of darkness, a condition imposed by the Greek government.
I can't actually give an interview, so sorry.
Greek television did not get many revealing interviews. After a lot of negotiation and uncertainty, the Greeks allowed a forces cargo ship to dock in Thessaloniki. It contained most of the hardware needed for this 3-year Balkan mission. 8 helicopters, 35 armored vehicles. This, too, unloaded in the dark. The convoy obliged to travel furtively through the countryside of a fellow NATO partner.
The first thing is that we've been sensitive to the issues that they've raised, and we've really tried to work around those. There are many times that, in fact, they've imposed restrictions on us that have been very difficult to live with, and we've come back with counter-offers to try and, again, achieve the end state.
As a precaution, the Canadians were ordered to wear their flak jackets and helmets till they were safely out of the port and the city. Some demonstrations here have turned nasty.
And again, the
Serb troop withdrawal looked to commanders at NATO and the Pentagon, who watched live television pictures sent from unmanned drones flying over Kosovo. The grainy pictures showed that after 78 consecutive days and more than 23,000 bombs, NATO's air power broke the will of Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic.
The final farewell. The Yugoslav army said its goodbyes to Čaklavica, a 100% Serb village, and to each other. They will now be dispersed throughout Serbia. Many of them were happy to get out alive after a year of war. Those they left behind, less happy. Many of the women were in tears. The gunfire didn't help. They fear there will be more in the coming months. The children waved, the adults worried. One picture, 2 stories. To the outside world, this is the retreat, and it heralds the homecoming of the Kosovar Albanians. On the inside, to the 150,000 Serb civilians, the picture fills them with fear and dread. The revenge is coming, and already we've seen the beginnings of possibly another exodus. We saw cars on the road with Đakovica number plates. The Serb minority there aren't waiting for the return. This man said, "Film this shame. There are no Serbs in Đakovica. The army told us they cannot guarantee our safety." He said he didn't know where he was going, and then he set off there. Other cars were coming out of Prizren. They compete for space with the heavy armor, rocket launchers and APCs. They leave behind heavy hearts. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Central Kosovo.
Transporters route as well will be to help remove broken down vehicles as well. The last thing that you want on a single route, especially a narrow route like this, are tanks, armoured personnel carriers blocking the route, and if there's a major breakdown, they'll either bring them back or pull them off to the side of the road. Of course, pulling them off to the side of the road, unless you're absolutely sure that it's clear of mines, is a very, very risky operation, hence the transporters there.
Look, we can see a helicopter on the right-hand side of the screen. Helicopters are going to be vital in the coming days as well.
Absolutely, and probably the first indication we get, and Jeremy will probably see it from where he is at the moment, right up on the border, is when the helicopters go in to secure the high ground, dropping off elements of 5 Airborne Brigade, the Paras.
Duncan Bullivant, our defence analyst, is with us. Duncan, this following news that the push has begun, British troops are heading, albeit rather falteringly in some places, but as we can see, considerable movement, things are on the go.
Yes, what we can see now is what looks like a squadron of tank transporters moving off. Now, they could be going back to bring forward armoured vehicles in an attempt to try and prevent armoured tanks having to drive through the centre of Skopje. It's too difficult to say, but what we have got here is a mixture. We've got vehicles here capable of carrying Challenger main battle tanks and also the slightly smaller Warrior infantry fighting vehicle, which the Irish Guards have got and which we've seen them training in a great deal lately. But they are on the move. These are not the vehicles that are going to lead the way into Kosovo. These are very much supporting vehicles. They're not fighting vehicles.
Mission. The troops had been expected to move in on Saturday, but their deployment was moved up by one day after a contingent of Russian troops crossed the border from Bosnia into Yugoslavia. Moscow and NATO have so far failed to agree on Russia's role and what it will be in the peacekeeping effort. News of the Russian troop movement prompted the US envoy Strobe Talbot to turn his plane around in midair and return to Moscow for more discussions.
We have seen them before. There is a sniper's position above the border crossing here, which we have observed from the time they dug it and were using it. We did see some soldiers still moving up and down the hillside, so apparently they are in this area of Kosovo. They are around the border, and we don't know if they'll be leaving in the next 24 hours when the NATO forces come in.
Now about who goes first into Kosovo was brewing. The only thing brewing in the British armoured column was tea. The armoured spearhead stalled in a field outside the Macedonian capital of Skopje. The final hurdle proved to be the mayor, mounting a spirited defence of his city, already gridlocked in rush hour traffic, refusing free passage to NATO's peace implementation force. The military have a term for it: hurry up and wait. At the Blace border crossing, talks between NATO and a delegation of Serbian military and municipal authorities were completed. The military planners now have a detailed knowledge of exactly what they're going to face on the road to Pristina. The border transit...
They've been readying themselves. There's been